Chapter 871. Old Can's face was tense and his voice was hoarse. Yes, I'm going to beat you up. Qin Anlin didn't retort, nor did he fight back. Of course, it was part of his ruse. He was willing to bet that if he fought with Old Can, Pei Chi would definitely help Old Kansas. It would be difficult for him to see her in the future. Fortunately, Old Can was rational and didn't hit him again. Otherwise, it would be too easy for him. Don't think that I don't know what he's thinking. He's still thinking about flirting with his little disciple. Qin Anlin stood up slowly and wiped his lips. Old Can, believe it or not, you don't know Suimo as well as I do. Old Can widened his eyes like copper bells. He couldn't wait to eat Qin Anlin up. Suimo is worldly in your heart, but do you really know her? Qin Anlin looked into Old Can's eyes. Do you know what she desires the most? Old Can didn't know what happened to Suimo, and Suimo would probably never tell him. Qin Anlin knew about it because of the news from the upper class. Just like how some men would talk about it with their closest friends after fooling around with a woman. He once heard that Suimo was fooled by a rich man until she couldn't bear a child. The process must have been unbearable, and it would be the pain of Sumo's life. She was most afraid that the people she cared about and loved would know about it. Old Can, let it go. Suimo is already suitable for you. She's not the Suimo of the past. Suimo would turn back if there was a way back. Sometimes it was just like that. After seeing too much of this world's brilliance, this world's good, this world's bad, this world's helplessness, what they wanted to find was still the him from before. However, things were different. It wasn't that she didn't want to turn back, but she couldn't. He looked at Old Can's beast-like expression and knew what he was thinking. He smiled bitterly. But I'm serious about Pei Chi. Do you believe me? Old Can squinted his eyes and his bearded face was expressionless. If it wasn't for Pei Chi, do you think I would have endured this for Pei Chi? Qin Anlin's tone was calm, but it carried the authority of a superior. Old Can smiled. That's right. President Qin, you're powerful, and everyone in the entertainment industry treats you like a god. But in the world of love, no one is superior. Do you think others should accept your charity? After that, Old Can left angrily. Qin Anlin just watched the elevator open and close, took out a cigarette from his pocket, lit it, and took a puff. Lao Can was right. His kindness was really worthless in the eyes of Pei Chi. He looked at himself in the mirror. It was still the same Qin Anlin, but in those eyes, he saw a hint of bitterness and love, and also saw his pitiful hope for love. Later on, Qin Anlin came almost every day, but he wouldn't stay for long, leaving after half an hour. Pei Chi couldn't even catch up. However, no matter how he came and went, he was never able to cast a stone into the lake of her heart. She was still unmoved, and every time he came, she would lazily deal with it. Qin Anlin sensed that Pei Chi wasn't as cold as before, but she had learned to be tactful like Old Kansas. This wasn't a good thing for him, because it was like boxing. Every punch he threw hit cotton and bounced back. Chapter 872. At the same time, Tang Yu was also restless. See You on Monday had always been influential, and the headline of this week's edition was Qin Anlin and Pei Chi. In the high-definition photo, Pei Chi was lying on Qin Anlin's back with one hand on Qin Anlin's shoulder and the other holding an umbrella. Qin Anlin had an indulgent smile on his face, while Pei Chi was pouting, looking aggrieved. It was drizzling, and the man in black was carrying a beautiful girl on his back. It was a beautiful scene. At least, they were a good match. Tang Yu stood in front of the French window in the CEO's office, frowning as he looked out. That direction was Shengyuan Hospital. There was a newspaper on his desk. See You on Monday. When he saw the photo, he was shocked and disappointed. He had guessed that Qin Anlin would do anything to get close to her. He even felt a sense of fear. He was afraid that she would fall for Qin Anlin. Qin Anlin was serious. He knew how much he could move a girl's heart. When he was in school, there were countless girls who liked Qin Anlin. Xiao Ren stood behind him and reported calmly, but in fact, she was about to cry in her heart. The CEO had been standing there for an hour and did not move an inch. She tried to calm herself down. Miss Pei's foot is injured, and she is now staying in the VIP ward on the top floor of Shengyuan Hospital. She hesitated for a moment before continuing. President Qin goes there every day. Huff. The temperature in the office dropped by a few degrees. Tang Yu's back stiffened. How's the injury? I asked the attending doctor, and it's nothing serious. It's just a sprained tendon. She will be discharged in 2 days. Xiao Ran had always been meticulous, so she had already asked about everything. Tang Yu pursed his thin lips and said with a suppressed voice, "Contact her and tell her that I will be going to the U.S. for 3 days at 7 o'clock tonight. That's the only time I have a chance to be interviewed by her." Xiao Ran stared blankly for a moment before instinctively saying, "What if Miss Pei is unwilling?" "She will agree." Tang Yu's voice was calm, like the calm before the storm. Shengyuan Hospital. She was there. Everything seemed to be destined. Xiao Ran quietly left, closing the door behind him. The room was quiet. Only Tang Yu stood there, trying hard to calm himself down. He was not sure if Chi-Chi would still be so cold to Qin Anlin after seeing that person. Would she still love and hate only him, Tang Yu? Or would she make a different choice? The phone on the table rang. Tang Yu paused for a moment and walked over. When he saw that it was Shun Lian calling, he did not intend to answer it. But the phone kept ringing. He just looked at it, his expression cold. Finally, the bell stopped ringing. But there was a message. He took a look and saw that it was from Shun Lian. There was only one sentence. "Do you feel as if your heart is being cut by a knife after reading the headlines?" Tang Yu deleted the message, and his expression became even colder. Shengyuan Hospital. Pei Chi-Chi walked out of the attending doctor's office, preparing to go back to the ward to tidy up. She would be discharged the next day. She had just received a call from Xiao Ran. Tang Yu was going to the U.S. for 3 days, and he wanted her to accompany him for an interview. She refused. Even if the chief editor would not let her go easily, she could just quit. No one knew what would happen in the end. When she reached the top floor and was about to exit the elevator, a man stood at the door and looked at her. "Miss Pei, our Mr. Shan wants to see you." Chapter 873. Pei Chi-Chi took a step back vigilantly, and her eyes were guarded. "I don't know any Mr. Shan." The man smiled. "Miss Pei, do you still remember Mr. Shan? Shan? Pei Chi-Chi was stunned. Her feet were as heavy as lead, and it was difficult for her to walk. She didn't know how she walked over. She only knew that when she stood in front of Shan, the sun was dazzling, but when it shone on her, she still felt cold. Shan saw her in his ward. He was sitting in a wheelchair, and from his back, his figure was not as good as before. He looked like a fat middle-aged man. When the door closed, Shan turned his head slowly, and his eyes fell on Pei Chi-Chi's face. His eyes were very complicated. At least, Pei Chi-Chi couldn't see through him. "After a long time," she said softly, "Mr. Shun, what can I do for you?" His eyes were very clear, and she didn't need to beat around the bush. Shan Zhongshan's eyes were fixed on her for a long time, and then he said softly, "After you came back, did you go to your mother's grave to see her?" When he mentioned Zhao Ku, Pei Chi-Chi's lips tightened. Some truth was about to come out, and it wasn't what she wanted to see, and she didn't want it to be true. She even wanted to escape. She didn't speak, but just stared at the familiar yet strange man in front of her. At this moment, she was like a frightened little animal, and all the hair on her body was standing on end. Shan Zhongshan looked at the girl who was full of wariness, and he said slowly and deeply, "Chi-Chi, I am your father." As he said that, he gently handed a document to her. Pei Chi-Chi had seen that kind of document once. At this time, it was again. She looked down, and her eyes were a little sore. Then she smiled faintly and put the document back in Shan Zhongshan's hand. "Mr. Shun, I don't want to see it. I think you are all mistaken. My father is Pei Mingyi." As she said that, she was about to leave. "Chi-Chi, I made Zhaoka pregnant. You and Tang Xian are both my children." Shan Zhongshan didn't hide anything. Pei Chi-Chi stopped in her tracks. Her face was as white as snow. Tang Xian was also Shan Zhongshan's child. How could this be? Then she and Tang Xian would have the same father and mother. Shan Zhongshan slowly stood up with the help of the wheelchair and walked towards Pei Chi-Chi. His voice was low as he said, "There's a DNA test between you and me. I did it when you were pregnant, but my body refused to allow me to donate my bone marrow to Tang Xian. Bone marrow? Pei Chi was in a daze. Xin Zhongshan's voice was calm. When you were 6 months pregnant, you were diagnosed with an acute blood disease. Pei Chi's ears were buzzing as if she had been struck by lightning. She took a step back and pressed her body against the door. Xin Zhongshan knew that she couldn't accept it, but he still said cruelly, "It was Shen Lian's bone marrow that saved you. But her condition is that Tang Yu divorce you." Was that why she thought Tang Ziyuan was her father? Pei Chi closed her eyes and shook her head violently. She had already guessed that Tang Yu wasn't her father and Tang Ziyuan wasn't her brother. But she didn't expect this to be the result. Also, Shun Zhongshan's voice was heavy. Tang Yu unconditionally gave 20% of Shang Yuan's wealth to Shen Lian, and he only has 31%. If he is with you, then this 20% could change the history of Shang Yuan. Pei Chi was stunned. Chapter 874. Xin Zhongshan looked at her quietly. Ask Tang Yu about this. He didn't want to say such cruel words to her. Xin Zhongshan didn't know that. He didn't want to tell her that the child was really gone. Pei Chi's face was as pale as snow. Suddenly, she took the document from Shan Zhongshan's hand and ran out. Her feet were still hurting, but she didn't care. She wanted to see Tang Yu immediately. She wanted to ask him, was the child really gone? In her heart, there was a last trace of despair. She hoped that the world still had a trace of mercy for her, just as if it pitied her. When she was outside, she quickly stopped a taxi and said Shang Yuan's name. The taxi driver sent her to the destination. She dropped the money and ran to the elevator. The receptionist didn't have time to stop her. Pei Chi stood in the elevator and looked at herself in the elevator mirror. Her forehead was full of sweat and her face was red. It had been a long time since she looked like this. The elevator reached the top floor. When the door opened, Xiao Ran was standing in front of it. Obviously, Xiao Ran had received a call from the receptionist. Chi, the president is not here, Xiao Ran said with some embarrassment. Pei Chi pushed him away and walked towards Tang Yu's office. She stretched out her hand and hit the door hard. However, no one answered and the door couldn't be opened. Even so, she still hit the door hard. Xiao Ran saw that her hands were red and went forward to persuade her. The president is not here. Why don't you come another day? Does he have time to see me? Pei Chi kicked hard and didn't stop. She didn't care if she hurt herself at all. Her voice was excited and desperate. Tang Yu, come out. She knew that he was inside. She knew that he didn't want to see her. She even knew that he wanted her to go to the United States with him for 3 days. What did he want to do? She kicked hard and made a scene shamelessly, but he still didn't open the door. Pei Chi held the document in her hand and slowly fell on the door. Her face was full of tears. In the office, Tang Yu sat at the desk with a cigarette in his hand. It wasn't that he didn't hear her cry. It wasn't that he didn't know the desire in her heart. However, he still decided not to tell her about Xiaoxin's existence for the time being. For the sake of Xiaoxin's safety, and to ignite the anger in Pei Chi's heart. Because he knew that if she had Xiaoxin, she would think of Tang Xian's death. She would leave him. He needed time. He needed a fresh start with her. Originally, he wouldn't have let her know part of the truth so quickly. Everything stemmed from his agreement with Shan Zhongshan. Now, apart from Shang Yuan, Shen Lian could no longer threaten him. Tang Yu finished the cigarette in his hand and pressed the intercom. Tell her when I'm going to the United States. The second secretary immediately went to Xiao Ran and whispered in his ear. Xiao Ran was also in a difficult position, so he could only pass the message to Pei Chi. Pei Chi looked at Xiao Ran in a daze. America. She pressed her body against the door and pursed her lips tightly. After a while, she kicked the door hard and left as quickly as she came. Pei Chi went back to the apartment and packed her luggage like crazy. Seeing this, Lao Can was envious. What happened? Pei Chi closed the suitcase and looked up at Lao Kansas. I'm going to the United States. The United States? Lao Can couldn't help frowning. Why are you going to the United States? An interview. Pei Chi said quickly and then walked towards the door with her luggage. Lao Can saw that her expression was not right, so he went forward and grabbed her hand. Chi, I can't let you go like this. Chapter 875. Old Can, let me go alone. She looked at him. This matter is very important to me. I must go. Old Can did not let go of her. He grabbed her arm with one hand and made a few calls with the other hand. Then, he felt like scolding someone. He looked at Pei-Chi-Chi. You'll be eaten up, do you know that? This was obviously a trap set by Tang Yu. He just wanted this little sheep to jump in and then be cleaned and eaten. Why didn't she understand? Pei-Chi-Chi's face was filled with madness. She smiled lightly. I don't care. Old Can, please let me go. I'll go crazy if I don't go. But as she smiled, her tears started to flow. Old Can could not bear to see her like this. He wiped away her tears with his rough hands and said in an unbelievably gentle voice, It's not that I won't let you go, but at least let me take you. Pei-Chi-Chi's lips were trembling. Old Can, thank you. Lao Can took the luggage from her hands, put one arm around her shoulder, and carried her downstairs. At this moment, Pei-Chi-Chi realized how weak her legs were. There were still tears on her face. She looked ugly in the elevator mirror. She sniffled and said in a nasal voice, Old Can, am I stupid? Old Can's palm warmly touched her little head and rubbed it. It's good that you know. This girl had always been calm and composed. When had she ever behaved like this? He also knew that this was a serious matter. Otherwise, Pei-Chi-Chi would not be like this. When they reached the ground floor, Old Can put her luggage in the trunk and went to get a visa from his connections before driving her to the airport. When they arrived at the airport, there was still an hour before Tang Yu's private plane took off and the sky was already dark. The airport was still brightly lit at night. The runway in the distance was filled with navigation lights that stretched as far as the eye could see. In the sky, there were planes taking off or returning. Only the strong night wind accompanied her. Another plane took off. The wind howled and the sound of the plane rushing into the clouds was heard as it slowly disappeared into the night sky. Pei-Chi-Chi stood there and suddenly turned around. Not far away, Tang Yu, dressed in black, stood there. Beside him were Xiao Ran and a few higher-ups. Lao Can tilted his head and looked at Pei-Chi-Chi. Girl, you really don't need me to accompany you? She did not make a sound but stared at Tang Yu in a daze. It was the same for Tang Yu. Everything would change. However, in the middle, there was already a separation of life and death. Slowly, she walked towards him. Old Can wanted to stop her, but he couldn't. Pei-Chi-Chi paused. Master, I will be back. After that, she walked towards Tang Yu without hesitation. Old Can narrowed his eyes. In the end, he just lit a cigarette and smoked in the night. When it came to relationships, no one else could interfere. Pei-Chi-Chi walked straight to Tang Yu, stood still, and raised her head. Her lips moved slightly, but in the end, she did not ask anything. Let's go. He took her luggage and said calmly. Then he walked in front. Pei-Chi-Chi followed behind him and walked towards the tarmac. Old Can smoked his cigarette and watched, feeling rather upset. Damn it. He couldn't help his disciple and watched her fall into the trap of the big bad wolf. Before boarding the plane, Pei-Chi-Chi suddenly turned around. Old Can could never forget her expression at this moment. It was so determined and resolute. Pei-Chi-Chi stared at Old Can and then boarded the plane. Chapter 876. On the way back, Old Can was listening to a sad song and smoking. Damn it, who didn't have a story to tell? But the people this girl had messed with were not easy to deal with. Look at Qin Anlin. He was a powerful person. He had finally managed to get close to Pei-Chi-Chi with great difficulty, but Tang Yu had effortlessly made Pei-Chi-Chi leave with him and even followed him abroad. On the plane, Tang Yu looked at Pei-Chi-Chi, who was still in a trance. He frowned and said lightly, Sit down first. I have something to ask you. Pei-Chi-Chi's voice was stiff. At this moment, a beautiful air stewardess came over and smiled. Mr. Tang, do you want to have your meal first? Tang Yu nodded. Before the air stewardess left, she took a look at Pei-Chi-Chi. Sit down and have your meal together. His voice was dignified and didn't contain much personal emotion. It was as if she was here just for an interview, as if they had nothing to do with each other in the past. Pei-Chi-Chi didn't move. The plane hasn't taken off yet. It's not too late if you want to get off now. Tang Yu said, and walked to the small dining table. The two air stewardesses attentively brought the dinner over and set it up before retreating. Tang Yu sat down, his handsome face slightly tilted. Miss Pei. She walked over and sat down opposite him. Tang Yu poured 2 glasses of red wine and handed one to her. Pei Chi took it from him. She pursed her lips and said softly, Tang Yu, aren't you going to explain? We'll talk after the meal, he said lightly. The glass of red wine in Pei Chi's hand was poured on his face. The dark red wine dripped down his handsome face and stained his clean white shirt. He was in a sorry state. The air stewardess came over with the snacks and was shocked to see this. She instinctively picked up a tissue and wanted to wipe it off for Tang Yu. But he just sat there and said coldly, Get off. The air stewardess was stunned. Tang Yu repeated, Disembark. When everyone left, only the two of them were left in the spacious room. Tang Yu picked up a tissue and slowly wiped the wine stains off his face, while Pei Chi kept staring at him. After a long time, he finally composed himself and looked at her. What do you want to ask? Pei Chi was eager to know, but at this moment, she was a little timid. His lips trembled, and he couldn't say a word for a long time. Tang Yu looked at her and said calmly, What Shen Zhongshan told you is true. Tang Exine, you left so quickly because of me. Is that so? Pei Chi closed her eyes. Shun Lian told Tang Exine, right? So, that little fool ended his own life so easily, just so that she wouldn't feel guilty when she woke up, so that he wouldn't feel sad when he saw her leave. She had never done anything for Tang Exine, but Tang Exine had done so much for her. Pei Chi felt like her throat was blocked. She thought that her pain had reached its limit, but she didn't expect that it would be even more painful. She closed her eyes, and the image of Tang Exine filled her mind. Tang Exine called her Chi and said that her cooking was delicious. Tang Yu didn't say anything, which was a tacit agreement. Pei Chi closed her eyes, and her heart was broken. What about the child? She closed her eyes, and her voice was choked. You can let me give birth to the child. This time, he answered her, because I don't want to lose you. Her eyes were still closed, and tears flowed down. Chapter 877. He had done so much for her. He had sacrificed Tang Exine, their child. He had even sacrificed Shang Yuan and himself. She should thank him. She shouldn't hate him. She should be hugging him right now. But things were different. After so much time had passed, everything was different. Have you ever thought about whether this is what I want? She looked at him. In this world, I'm the only one living well. You arranged for Tang Ziyuan to be my father, and you to be my brother. You even helped me find a husband in the future. Yet, you watched me be happy and suffered alone, didn't you? She laughed and cried. Tang Yu, you're great, but this is not what I want. When he told her that they were brother and sister, and that the child could not be kept, she screamed at him crazily. She didn't care. She just wanted to be with him. But the truth was that she was sick. Everything he had done was for her. But this was not what she wanted. What she wanted was to give birth to the child. And she and he were husband and wife for a lifetime, husband and wife for a day. He had made her live with hatred for so long. But in the end, it was just a misunderstanding. Tang Yu, you've done everything. But do you know? I'm used to hate, and I don't know how to love anymore. Her little face was desolate. I have nothing now. Without Tang Exine, without the child, she did not know how to love him anymore. Tang Yu closed his eyes and said in a sorrowful voice, You still have me. Pei Chi looked down. I don't dare to take it anymore. After she said that, she looked up. Tang Yu had already stood up. In just a second, she was carried by him and walked straight to the lounge. She was stunned for a moment and immediately struggled. What are you doing? Tang Yu did not speak. He just tightened his jaw and walked quickly into the lounge. She was placed on a big snow-white bed, and her hands were held high by him with one hand. He used the other hand to untie her hair, and her long black hair instantly fell on the pillow. Pei Chi screamed. Since her hands were restrained, she used her legs to kick him. Tang Yu loosened his tie and tied her hands to the head of the bed. Pervert! She closed her eyes and her face looked extremely fragile because of the tear stains. Tang Yu, let go of me. She was instinctively resistant to doing that with him. Because of the child, and also because he was now Shan Lian's fiancé. Moreover, it was because she hated him. This kind of hatred was the kind of deep love that was born out of despair. Her violent struggle soon left a bloody mark on her wrist. His heart ached, but he still did not untie her. She was wearing a thin wool dress, and her stockings had been torn off and thrown on the carpet. The tender legs brought back a burning memory, and the scenes of those hot nights appeared in his mind one by one. Tang Yu admitted that he was despicable and that he wanted her shamelessly. However, he was afraid that if he did not take action, she would leave with Qin Anlin, and the most direct way to enter a woman's heart was to have her and sleep with her. He believed that if Pei Chi had physical contact with him, she would not be with Qin Anlin for the time being. Because his Chi would not do that, he firmly tore off all her clothes with a hint of madness. Tang Yu, I will hate you. She closed her eyes and was still kicking her little feet, but he caught her with one hand. He unbuttoned his shirt with one hand and pressed her little feet with the other. Chapter 878. Tang Yu could not take it anymore. He had waited for too long. Even if she was blaming and hating him in her heart, he could not hold it in any longer. Now, he wanted to have her and do it with her, and her little feet were so fair and adorable. He could not care less at the moment. Pei Chi bit her lips and looked at him in shock. His handsome face was slightly distorted because he was too engrossed in it. His breathing had never been so messy before. It was as uncontrollable as that pitiful young man. He did not know what to do. She closed her eyes and shook her head hopelessly on the pillow, wanting to get rid of him, but he held her little feet firmly and did whatever he wanted. That feeling was like a piece of frozen tofu. It almost drove him crazy. In such a short 2 minutes, it was as if they had gone through life and death. It was as if they had gone through life and death. It was as if they had gone through life and death. In his slightly hoarse breathing, her screams came up, ending this absurd matter. Tang Yu hugged her to calm himself down, burying his face in her neck. His scorching breath blew on her soft little neck, burning her to the point that she almost couldn't stand it. It also caused a wave of shameful arousal. The tip of his nose was slightly cold as it touched her delicate neck. It was a little kissing, like an animal after a certain time. Pei Chi looked up and closed her eyes. Her mouth was moving slightly, and her voice was weak. Pervert! Tang Yu was still hugging her. His hand was on her soft waist, and he pressed it gently. Her body went limp, and her voice was even weaker. Let go of me. He knew her weakness very well and did not let go. He hugged her and touched her as if he was comforting her without any desire. However, only Pei Chi knew that every time he touched her, it was the most unbearable part of her body. Her body had shamefully felt something for him. It was covered with a thin layer of sweat, but it was still moving. His large palm had a kind of leisurely feeling, not as impatient as before. I hate you. She closed her eyes. Tang Yu, if you dare to do anything to me, I swear you will never find me again. He flipped over and covered her. His gaze was deep and his bright eyes flashed with a familiar expression. His slender fingers gently touched her little mouth, and his voice was unbelievably hoarse. Pei Chi, I've already done it. His handsome face was filled with pain due to the repressed emotions. Beads of perspiration dripped from his forehead and landed on her collarbone. Very, very hot, but he was still enduring it. His shirt was mostly unbuttoned and slightly open. From her angle, he looked very sexy. It was the kind of sexy that women couldn't wait to unbutton. Pei Chi suddenly felt that her lips were very dry. She just watched like that, and those fiery memories came flooding back like a tide. The narrow space was suffocating. Even their sweat was heating up, and the air was filled with warmth. Their eyes met. In his eyes, there was the deepest desire, as if he wanted to tear her apart. Just as he was about to explode, he suddenly got off the bed and walked into the bathroom. Pei Chi heard the sound of running water. She closed her eyes, thinking that he had let her go. Not long after, he came back with a hot towel in his hand. He sat on the side of the bed, held her little feet, and helped her clean them up bit by bit. Chapter 879. When he did all this, he was very gentle. Pei Chi leaned her body upwards and looked at his downcast eyes. Her face was filled with gentleness. Such moments of silence belonged to a young couple. He held her tender little foot and carefully wiped it clean. She retracted her hand. Tang Yu looked up at her, and then he slowly unbuttoned the last 2 buttons of his shirt. His shirt was thrown onto her face gently. With his manly aura, it covered her face and blocked her vision. If she could see it, she would know how distorted Tang Yu's face was. He was tormented by his desire. Pei Chi was shocked and shook her head instinctively. She wanted to get rid of the shirt, but the more she struggled, the tighter the shirt got. In that narrow space, her breath was messy and mixed with his. Her eyes were blindfolded, and all her senses were magnified and magnified. Her body felt cold, and then she was deeply, deeply possessed by him. She was sweating profusely, and she was panting in pain. It had been a long time since she had sex. It was painful when she was awake, but it was also because of the pain that it felt especially real. He didn't know when, but the tie on her hand had been untied. Her hands were on his shoulders, and her nails had sunk deep into the muscles of his back, leaving a few long bloody marks. It was a shocking sight. At the last moment, she screamed. Because she knew that he did not have any protective measures, he just gave it to her directly. Although she struggled with all her might, he still gave it all to her. Everything calmed down, and the space was filled with a man's secret scent and a woman's sweetness. Pei Chi's face was turned to the side and did not move at all. Tang Yu turned to the side and said calmly, "You don't need to take medicine. I'll get a vasectomy." Pei Chi turned her head abruptly and looked at him in disbelief. "Vasectomy? Why?" "Chi, it's not because I did anything with Shunlian. I didn't do anything with her. I just—" He turned his face and looked at her very seriously. "I just don't want to have that kind of, what if? I don't want you to face that kind of unbearable reality one day when you are plotted against by others." He paused for a moment before continuing, "I won't allow that to happen." More importantly, he couldn't let her get pregnant again. Chi-Chi's body was no longer suitable for pregnancy. He didn't want her to secretly take medicine, so he had a vasectomy. Pei Chi closed her eyes and didn't say anything. Her heart was in a mess. She did not intend to do anything after sleeping with him once, and he was the one who forced her to. It didn't change anything. How could Tang Yu not know? He reached out and hugged her, burying his face in her hair and letting out a long sigh. Pei Chi, bear with it. She did not understand why he said that, but when she opened her eyes and saw his bloodshot eyes, she understood. Her little mouth was blocked. As he kissed her, he took out a bottle of wine from the cabinet. He bit off the cork, propped himself up, took a sip, and lowered his body to feed her. Pei Chi refused and twisted her head to struggle, but he always had a way to find her little head. Just like that, she was fed half a bottle of wine, and she was already drunk. Chapter 880. The drunken girl lay there obediently, her misty eyes almost dripping water. Tang Yu lowered his head, and his thin lips touched her little mouth. He kissed her slowly but not deeply. Her body was like water. Her eyes were blurry as she called out his name. Finally, she opened her little mouth slightly and took the initiative to welcome him. It was different when 2 people loved each other and when one party was forced. Tang Yu's heart was filled with love, and all his yearning was comforted at that moment. That night, on the plane to America, he was the fire, and she was the water. But strangely, they fused again and again until they were exhausted. When Pei Chi woke up, she was already in a villa in the suburbs of a certain state in America. It was quiet all around. Her head was still a little dizzy, but it wasn't too uncomfortable. This was where Lin Yun had lived for more than a year, and it was where the twins were born. Pei Chi opened her eyes and looked at the curtain fluttering gently in the wind, and the room was quiet and white. In a trance, she felt as if she had returned to the rose garden and woke up in their room. She sat up and looked at the moon-white spaghetti straps on her body. The thin straps held up the loose pajamas, and she felt that the thin straps were suitable for a man to tear off. She stepped on the thick carpet barefoot, and her feet were fair and beautiful. She looked down and thought of everything that Tang Yu had done to her on the plane. There was a low and hoarse voice in her ear, and there was only a door between them. Pei Chi looked at the white carved door and hesitated for a moment before pushing it open. The door opened, and inside was a study. Tang Yu was sitting behind the desk, having a video conference with his headset on. He was wearing a three-piece suit, and he looked handsome. When he heard the voice, he turned to look at her. There was no blind spot on his face, and his shaved chin was clean and had a tinge of green, which made him even more attractive. At this time, he was indeed at the most attractive age for a man. After a few seconds, he immediately turned around and said a few words in English. Pei Chi mouthed to him, "I have something to talk to you about." A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth as he ended the meeting. Turning off the computer, he looked at her and smiled. "Are you hungry? Shall I get someone to send breakfast over?" Only then did Pei Chi realize that it was morning in the United States. He shook his head. "I have something to talk to you about. Let's talk after breakfast." He got up and walked in front of her. His tall body standing in front of her made her look even more petite and weak. He looked down from above, his breath enveloping her body as he slowly said, "You haven't eaten for a day?" "That's not the point." Pei Chi's voice sounded like she couldn't bear it anymore. She pursed her lips and looked at him. The man stretched out his long finger and tapped on her slightly swollen lips. He bent down and his handsome face was very close to hers. He did not deny that he was seducing her. Before knowing the existence of Xiaoxin, he could only use his masculinity to seduce her. Tang Yu thought somewhat self-deprecatingly. He said slowly, "Then what's the point? Your interview? Or leaving me again and going back to City H?" Pei Chi immediately grabbed his finger, but how could she compete with a mature man in the prime of his life? Not only did he not let her go, but he also grabbed her little hand and forcefully brought her little hand to touch his lips. Pei Chi was extremely embarrassed. "Let go of me." Chapter 881. That kind of hot and scorching gaze could almost melt her. It made her feel that the clothes on her body did not exist, and he was touching all of her with his gaze. Her body trembled, and she instinctively hugged herself. His eyes were a little warmer, and he let go of her for the time being. Pei Chi stood there, feeling hot and cold at the same time. She could also feel his dominance, but she could not see through his inner thoughts. She had no idea what he wanted to do. She instinctively felt that he forced her to come to America with him for 3 days, not just to sleep with her. "Tang Yu, what do you want to do?" Her voice was very cold, as if she was talking to a stranger. That misunderstanding was solved. His sacrifice and his forbearance could not change everything. Between them, there was more probing, more scheming. "Let's go to the dining room and talk." He walked out elegantly. Pei Chi went to the bathroom attached to the bedroom to wash her face, change her clothes, and go downstairs. The villa was not very big, but it was very cozy. The dining room and the living room were connected, and there was a piano in front of the floor-to-ceiling window in the living room. Tang Yu sat there and played Dialyse. Pei Chi stood at the top of the stairs and looked straight at him. Tang Yu finished playing the whole song and looked up at her. Breakfast. He treated her like the past, but not like the past, so she could not guess what he was thinking. Pei Chi quickly and simply finished eating, and then looked at him. He was the same as before, and even his posture when eating was extremely pleasing to the eye. He really brought out his masculinity to the extreme. Tang Yu finally finished his meal, wiped his lower lip, and looked up at her. "Pei Chi, what do you want to talk about? What deal do you have with Xinzhongshan?" Pei Chi asked directly. Tang Yu was quiet for a while, and then he opened his mouth, but he did not directly answer her question. He looked at her and was more direct than she was, and his tone was a little faint. "Pei Chi, do you still love me?" She was stunned. She pursed her lips tightly into a straight line, and then began to tremble again. "You love me," he said with certainty. Then he got up and walked over to her. He bent over and kissed her on the lips. There was no lust in his eyes. It was very, very gentle. His kiss was like a feather touching the softest part of her heart. She lifted her head and looked at him. She wanted to say no, but she couldn't. Perhaps her conflicted expression pleased him as he returned to his seat. Pei-Chi-Chi, you can choose to run away, but there's a possibility that you won't get the reward for clearing this stage. Prizes? Her heart was beating wildly. She stared at him in a daze. Tang Yu compromised. If you cooperate with Shun Zhongshan, your prize will be me and our child. He spoke vaguely, not telling her the whole truth, but giving her hope. Pei-Chi-Chi was stunned. He said, children. The child is still there? Her lips were trembling uncontrollably, and so was her voice. It was almost incoherent. Tang Yu's expression was noble. Yes, but Chi-Chi. He reached out and pulled her to his side. She suddenly lay on his lap, and her face happened to be facing a certain part of him, but she couldn't care less. She raised her head, and her eyes were filled with tears. You said the child is still there? He sighed in his heart. Actually, he didn't want her to know so much, but obviously, his Chi-Chi needed a little bit of bait before she was willing to return to his side. Chapter 882. Yes. His fingers touched her face, but she waved them away. She finally cried and hit his shoulder with her little hand. Tang Yu, you said the child is still here. She hit him with all her might. I want to see her. He held her arm and pulled her into his arms. He lowered his head and looked at her deeply. Chi-Chi, I've said it before. The child and I are your reward for clearing the game. She looked at him, and for some reason, she said the truth. But I only want the child. As for Tang Yu, wasn't he her fiancé? Pei-Chi-Chi felt that she had become a lot bolder. In the past, she had worshipped him as a god, but now that they hadn't been together for a long time, it didn't matter anymore. Tang Yu's face darkened. Pei-Chi-Chi, you can be more straightforward. Pei-Chi-Chi was trapped in his arms. She pursed her lips and begged, Tang Yu, what does she look like? Is she pretty? Tang Yu's gaze landed on her anxious face, and he snorted. You want to know? She bit her lip and nodded, not realizing how embarrassing it was for her to lie in his arms. Tang Yu naturally knew. Her small and soft body was lying in his arms, like a soft little kitten. Yu Wang, who had vented his anger, began to become restless again, torturing him to the point of pain. He wasn't having a good time, so he naturally wouldn't let her have an easy time. His dark eyes were locked on hers, and his voice was a little hoarse. Pei-Chi-Chi, do you only want the child? What about me? Pei-Chi-Chi looked away. Yes. She sounded a little awkward. I don't dare to take it. Mr. Tang is President Shun's fiancé now. Tang Yu smiled faintly, reaching out to hook her little chin, half forcing her to look at him. He had always been calm and confident, but at this moment, he was indescribably ecstatic. His voice was low and slow. Are you jealous? No. She stared at him, trying not to blush, because he looked devilishly handsome, making people want to eat him up. He smiled. Chi-Chi, I've said it before. There's nothing going on between me and Shun Lian. We haven't even held hands, let alone kissing or making love. Pausing for a moment, his gaze darkened. He pushed the tray to the side and carried her to the luxurious dining table. Then, he climbed on top of her. Her petite body was folded on the dining table by him. Her long hair was as black as ink. It was the way he liked it. He held her sharp chin and looked at her beautiful face. His gaze was deep. It's someone else's. You slept with it too. Just as she was about to say something, his fingers exerted a little force and her little mouth unconsciously opened slightly. Her slightly swollen lips were extremely red, and her nimble little tongue was also faintly discernible. She looked very seductive, as if she was luring him to kiss her. She was a little embarrassed and wanted to bite him. Tang Yu allowed her to bite him. Not only did he not avoid it, he even teased her. Pei-Chi-Chi, who was the one who hooked her arms around my waist last night and screamed at me not to stop. She asked me to use more force. She was stunned and then looked away. I didn't. Is that so? Tang Yu took out his cell phone, unlocked it, and played a recording. Instantly, a warm voice rang out in the narrow space. It was her voice. Tang Yu, don't kiss there. Don't. The voice had an unmistakable joy at the end, and then it sounded like a plea. Don't stop, ah. Chapter 883. And by reaching out like this, it was as if she was desperately sending herself to him. Tang Yu lowered his head and suddenly kissed her little mouth. Before she could resist, he held her back with one hand and used both hands to cushion her back to prevent her from hurting. Pei Chi widened her eyes and looked at the magnified, handsome face. No matter how she struggled, he was able to stick to her little mouth and not let her escape. They kissed like this. It was originally just a passionate kiss, but the rhythm slowly changed. His big palm began to move along her waistline into her clothes. When he touched her delicate skin, it was even more uncontrollable. Tang Yu kissed her tightly and tenderly, unable to control himself. Once the floodgates were opened, it could not be closed again. In his arms, it was a dose of poison, provoking him to taste it again and again. Suddenly, a slap landed on his handsome face. The slap shocked both of them. Pei Chi did not know why she hit him. She just felt that he was despicable. While she was still in a daze, her body was forcefully pressed against the hard table. Her hands were pinned on both sides, and his body was covered tightly without a single gap. It was very embarrassing, especially the pleasure on the senses. It was magnified infinitely. Pei Chi pursed her lips and closed her eyes, incomparably fragile. Chi, don't you want to see the child? He suddenly whispered in her ear. There was a trace of imperceptible naughtiness in his tone. Pei Chi raised her head and looked at him. Then kiss me. Take the initiative. He smiled faintly and then let go of her and sat back on the dining chair. Pei Chi blinked her eyes and only came back to her senses after a long time. She slowly climbed down from the dining table and sat on his lap. It used to be so intimate and natural, but now it was a little unbearable. She looked at him. Tang Yu, you bastard. With that, she kissed his lips fiercely and bit him hard at the same time. She kissed him fiercely and bit him hard. A trace of blood filled their lips. It was very painful, but Tang Yu chuckled softly. Actually, his Chi had not changed. She was still so willful and adorable. He took the kiss and kissed her hard, as if he wanted to make up for all the losses he had suffered in the past few days, and also as if he wanted to erase her contact with Qin Anlin and Jian Rong. Only God knew how jealous he was. How angry. The more angry he was, the harder he kissed the little fellow in his arms. In the end, he said, Chi, I really want to hit your dick. In the end, he still showed her the back of a little girl. He only showed her the back of a little girl. But Pei Chi kept staring at her phone. She kept looking at it. The little person was walking in the small garden, wearing small floral clothes. Her little butt looked fat, and her chubby little hand was holding a small water bottle, as if she was a little gardener. The little arm was as cute as a pink lotus root. Pei Chi sat in his arms and looked at it. Her fingers were clenched tightly, as if she would turn around if she looked at the little person for a while longer. Tang Yu put away his phone, and his eyes became cold and noble again. Pei Chi's hand was empty. She looked up at him. Pei Chi, time's up. He smiled. Remember, this is the reward for clearing the game. She gritted her teeth. Tang Yu, give me back the child. His voice was a little harsh. Pei Chi, I thought it was better now. Chapter 884. He got up and looked at her. Let's go upstairs to the study. She didn't move. He looked at her. Do you want me to carry you? This time, Pei Chi jumped down. His movements were very fast, like a little monkey. Tang Yu smiled and got up to go upstairs. His heart was incredibly soft. To a certain extent, he was grateful to Shen Zhongshan. At least, he didn't have to wait for so long. She followed behind him reluctantly. In the study, he took a document from the bookcase and handed it to her. These are for you to sign. Pei Chi pursed her lips and opened it. She was stunned when she saw it. Xin Zhongshan's will? Yes. Tang Yu smiled. And it was verified by an authoritative doctor. Uncle Shun wrote it when he was completely conscious. Pei Chi flipped to the date, and she was even more stunned. That was before she got sick. In other words, in fact, Xin Zhongshan felt unwell a week after he was drugged by Shenlian. It was also found out after a checkup. However, it was too late at that time, so he simply beat her at her own game. Tang Yu said calmly, Chi, maybe you can't forgive him at the moment, just like you can't forgive me, but I believe he has regretted it. Pei Chi looked at the will. It was about the distribution of Jean Tai's shares. Shenlian still had an absolute advantage, about 28.5%, and she had 18%. It was very difficult to shake Shenlian's position. Pei Chi looked down and said in a low voice, I don't know why he wants me to sign this. Tang Yu looked at her. At least, it won't make Shenlian so happy. This will throw her into confusion. In addition, Shen Zhongshan left 5 billion yuan in cash to you. Tang Yu understood that Shen Zhongshan's arrangement was to train Pei Chi as his successor. Pei Chi looked at it, but she still didn't look happy or sad. After a while, she chuckled bitterly. What do I need this money for? It was good that she was living like this. Like I said, the child and I are the reward for clearing the mission. Tang Yu's slender fingers pulled out another document. And this one, Pei Chi took it and looked at him in surprise and shock. This was a company called Boyi, with a registered capital of 50 million in current assets. 1 0, 2 zeros, 3 zeros. Pei Chi's eyes widened. This company's current assets were more than 310 billion. It couldn't be Shen Zhongshan's property. This is my asset, Tang Yu said lightly and grabbed Pei Chi's hand to sign. She was a little resistant and looked at him. Tang Yu, what are you thinking of doing? He looked at her and smiled. Pei Chi, I think you know that 20% of Shangyuan is in Shanlian's hands, and Boyi is the result of transferring my assets. Now Shangyuan is just an empty shell, and all the subsidiaries have been sold to the Pei Corporation at a low price. Pei Corporation? Pei Chi's eyes widened in disbelief. Yes, Pei Huan doesn't know how to run a business. Her shares have long been diluted by me, and there is only 5% left. Boyi is actually a subsidiary of the Pei Corporation, but the headquarters of the Pei Corporation has not developed. Tang Yu paused and then said, in fact, Boyi is a monster among the subsidiaries of the Pei Corporation. Chapter 885. Pei Chi, I've said it before, the reward for passing the test. He smiled, as if he was not afraid that she would not sign it. Pei Chi looked up at him. What will happen to Shenlian in the end? One of Shen Zhongshan's conditions is to keep Shenlian safe. Tang Yu said emotionlessly. And my condition is to keep you safe. Shen Zhongshan and Tang Yu signed an agreement. If Pei Chi's body was in trouble, Shen Zhongshan would risk his life to save her, provided that Shenlian was kept. Shen Zhongshan handed Jean Taihe to Pei Chi and chose to be tolerant of Shenlian. No matter how bad she was still his daughter, and he was the one who let them down in the first half of his life. Pei Chi looked at the papers many times and finally looked at him. Tang Yu, you want me to use these to deal with Shangyuan, right? So that he could buy Shangyuan and make the 20% in Shenlian's hands become worthless. Tang Yu smiled and reached out to touch her little head. Our Chi is very smart. She held the pin in her hand and hesitated to sign it. Tang Yu looked at her. You don't dare? Pei Chi pursed her lips. Tang Yu, my condition is the child. Of course, he added silently in his heart, and me. Pei Chi seemed to know what he was thinking. She snorted. I've said that I'm not interested in other people's men. She also added, in the end, I will leave you to Shenlian. You're willing to? Tang Yu carried her to the desk, locked her with one hand, and pressed a button on his phone with the other. The phone was directly in a voice chat with Qin Anlin, but it was muted. Pei Chi couldn't hear anything, but Qin Anlin could hear everything on this side. Tang Yu pushed against Pei Chi and twisted her arms behind her back. His thin lips moved down slowly along her erline, and one of his large palms caressed her. Every time he kissed a place, he would praise how delicate and soft her skin was. Pei Chi wanted to struggle, but he untied his tie with one hand and restrained her just like he did on the plane last night. Be good, listen to me. His voice was gentle and comforting. Chi, the reward for clearing the level will be given in advance. Pei Chi struggled, but to no avail. She bit him on the shoulder. Tang Yu, let go of me. Bastard, more than 10 hours ago. He did it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, at least 5 times. Tang Yu's voice was coaxing. Be good, just once. He slowly squatted down and removed her shoes. Pei Chi's feet straightened, and she screamed. He was so perverted. He was actually kissing her feet one by one, taking turns kissing her toes. She shrunk her feet, but he didn't let her go. He looked up with a deep gaze. Pei Chi, do you think I'm a pervert? Yes. He smiled faintly, noble and elegant. But what he did was worse than a beast. He slowly straightened his body, and then she couldn't see his face. The dress blocked his face, and she could only see his shoulders. A pair of underwear flew out, half hanging on her tender calf. Pei Chi bit her lip and tried to hold it in. She couldn't believe that he would do such a thing to her. Finally, her body softened. But she didn't know that a short 5 minutes was enough to send Qin Anlin from heaven to hell. Qin Anlin closed his eyes, then began to laugh bitterly. Chapter 886. Qin Anlin listened quietly and listened to Pei Chi's soft cries. How could he not know that it was the sound of a girl when she was in paradise? His face was as dark as water, and he turned off the voice call. He knew that this was Tang Yu's warning. But so what? Tang Yu and Pei Chi had already divorced. At most, he had used improper methods to possess her. Qin Anlin sadly realized that he was still unwilling to give up and was still finding excuses for himself and her. He raised his head and looked at the ceiling, admitting to himself that he actually didn't want to let go. His phone rang again, and he cursed softly. When did Tang Yu become so bored? He took a look and saw that it was his assistant, Kimmy. He looked at it and said in a bad mood, "What's the matter?" Kam could tell that he was in a bad mood, so he said carefully, "President Qin, Pei Huan's agent, Xiao Mei, called and said that something happened to Pei Huan at a dinner party." Qin Anlin furrowed his brows and asked in a not overly concerned manner, "What happened?" Kam didn't dare to hide anything and told him everything. Pei Huan's crew was having dinner tonight, and the main investor was also there. He invested more than 100 million yuan to get Pei Huan to drink with him. He didn't make any more excessive requests, just kissing and touching. But that woman wasn't willing and just sat there. Later, the investor got angry and asked her to sleep with him. Pei Huan naturally refused, and now she's being held there. Kam specifically explained that the investor was Fifth Master O, who had some background in the underworld. Pei Huan was really too much. She wasn't an A-lister, so it was normal for her to touch and kiss. If she was asked to sleep with him, she wouldn't do it for nothing. She even thought that she was Empress Yi. At that moment, Xiao Mei was extremely anxious. She called everywhere to save Pei Huan. However, distant water couldn't put out a nearby fire. Qin Anlin flew over to a winery on the outskirts of B City. Pei Huan was already asleep. Qin Anlin held his phone and closed his eyes. 10,000 curses ran through his heart. When did Pei Huan become the Holy Maiden? If all the artists under him were like her, would King Entertainment still exist? This was the unspoken rule of the entertainment industry. It was not her first day in the industry. Moreover, when she had an ambiguous relationship with the higher-ups in the company, he had also turned a blind eye. Pei Huan had done these things many times. Tell Xiaomei that if I call Owuya, he might not give me face, Qin Anlin said calmly. In fact, he did not want to fall out with Fifth Master O because of Pei Huan. Qin Anlin hung up the phone and called Fifth Master O. He only told him not to kill anyone on his account. Xiaomei waited there, but Owuya did not release her. She was about to go crazy. Hearing Pei Huan's screams, little Mei wished she could rush in. Just as she was feeling anxious, a tall and mighty figure flashed in front of her. Little May was so happy that she cried tears of joy. She had finally met someone she knew. She grabbed the man's arm and said anxiously, "Mr. Can, please help me save Pei Huan. Old Can happened to have a dinner there." When he heard that, he frowned and looked at Xiao Mei. "Who are you?" Chapter 887. Lao Can stared at Xiao Mei for a few seconds. Then, he cursed under his breath and kicked the door open. In the private room, Pei Huan was pinned down on the sofa by Fifth Master Owuya. Her clothes were in disarray. Fifth Master Owuya was a middle-aged man with a high net worth. He was very popular in both the underworld and in the underworld, but Pei Huan was the first person who did not give him face. He did not want to do anything. He just wanted to take her down a notch. She was a woman, after all, so he just slept with her. Fifth Master Owuya had 2 bodyguards by his side, so he did not avoid them. At that moment, Oldkin kicked the door and alerted the people inside. Pei Huan screamed and grabbed the clothes beside her to cover herself. Her eyes were wide open as she looked at Old Kansas. Her palm-sized face was full of tears, and her lips were trembling. In an instant, her eyes regained their luster, and she stared straight into Old Can's eyes. Fifth Master Owuya had just pulled down his zipper when she rushed in and pulled it up again in disappointment. She looked at Old Can and asked, "Who is this woman to you?" "She's my wife." Old Can's voice was a little gruff. "Tell me, what do I have to do for you to let her go?" Fifth Master Owuya smiled insincerely. "Brother, if you want to take her away from me, you'll have to go through my men." Old Can took off his denim jacket, revealing his muscular body and his bearded eyes. "I, Old Can, have never been afraid of anyone since I started my career." Fifth Master Owuya smiled. "That's great. I like loyal and responsible men the most. If you win, you can leave with this woman. I won't stop you. However, if you lose, don't blame me for not giving you face in front of you." Old Can sneered. "You have your rules, and I have mine too. If I can't beat you, I'll stay and let my woman go." Fifth Master Owuya was stunned. Then, he smiled and clapped. "You're ambitious. However, you have to think carefully. It's not worth it to be beaten up for a woman." Old Can wiped his lips. "I'll blow up your head." Fifth Master Owuya waved his hand, and his 2 bodyguards appeared out of nowhere like Bruce Lee. They were really 2 peerless experts. I can't destroy Old Can's prestige, but Old Can really isn't a match for the other party. It's 2 against 1 again. One of them had the back of a tiger and the waist of a bear, while the other 2 were short and capable. They fought loudly, and Fifth Master Owuya lit a cigar and smoked slowly. The sound of shattering in the box was endless, and occasionally there was blood splashing everywhere. Pei Huan kept screaming and wanted to rush over to pull Lao Can away. But Lao Can's eyes were bloodshot, and he roared at her not to go over. In the end, Old Can was still beaten to the ground. His head was smashed by the beer bottle, and blood flowed down his forehead. His face was covered in blood, and his eyes were swollen. Pei Huan rushed over and hugged him. "Old Can, why are you so silly?" Her knee was pricked by the broken glass and blood oozed out, but she didn't feel any pain. Old Can would probably be in more pain. Her nerves, which had been numb for too long, finally felt pain. This man could have ignored her. Just like what he said, neither of them were pure men and women. Did they have to take responsibility for sleeping together? He didn't want to marry her, but he was willing to sacrifice himself for her. At this moment, Pei Huan was satisfied. Chapter 888. Her heart was filled with sorrow and malice toward the world. She did not hesitate to abort the child, so much so that she might never be able to get pregnant again. That time, it was her revenge on the world, but she was the one who was hurt in the end. However, at this moment, she had everything. All of this was given to her by the man named Old Can. Pei Huan hugged Old Can and asked him why he was so stupid. Oldkin leaned against the sofa and smiled. However, his smile only stretched the muscles on his face. I can't bear to see a woman being wronged. Oldkin panted and did not have the strength to move anymore. He looked at Pei Huan. She was such a beautiful girl, but she was crying like that. He used all his strength to reach out his hand and slowly wipe the tears from the corners of her eyes. However, his palm was covered in blood, so he smeared his blood on her face too. There was a hint of bitterness in Old Can's eyes. His lips moved slightly. Be obedient and go back. If you're not short of money, don't work in this industry. He might not be able to help her anymore in the future. Stop talking. Pei Huan pressed down on his large palm and did not let him move an inch. She buried her face in Old Can's heart. At this moment, she knew very well that she had fallen in love with this man. There had never been a man who asked her to be obedient in such a gentle manner. Pei Huan closed her eyes and stood up suddenly. She looked at Owuya and said, I'll sleep with you. Let him go. Owuya was still sitting on the sofa, smoking his favorite cigar. He sneered when he heard Pei Huan's words. Do you think this is a place where you can put on a show and sleep with whoever you want? He looked at Pei Huan and said, I'm not interested in someone like you. He put out the cigar and ordered his men, drag him on the ground back, clean his wounds and send him to my room. Pei Huan was stunned. She screamed and knelt down to hug Owuya's leg. Her face was covered in tears as she hugged Owuya desperately and did not let him go. This was because she knew that Old Can would not survive if Owuya had sex with him. A man being raped and a woman being raped were two different concepts. She, Pei Huan, was a rotten person anyway, so it didn't matter if she had another man. She held Owuya with one hand and unbuttoned her shirt with the other. She kissed the bottom of his trousers. I beg you. I'm willing to do anything. Please let him go. Old Can's eyes were bloodshot. Pei Huan, what's wrong with you? I'm going to slap you to death. However, Pei Huan acted as if she did not hear him. She was still hugging Owuya's leg and begging. What had Fifth Master O not seen before? Pei Huan wanted to suppress him with such a small place. If you continue to make a fuss, I'll drag you away with me. If you don't want to be gang-raped by my brother, then scram. Owuya hated women crying the most, so he kicked Pei Huan far away. Pei Huan rolled around on the ground and was stabbed into a few pieces, causing Shan Yin to cry out in pain. Old Can was dragged away, leaving a long trail of blood on the ground. The door opened, as if the gates of hell had opened. But to little Mei, who was outside, it was like she had received salvation because Pei Huan was fine. She went forward to help Pei Huan up, but Pei Huan was in a daze. Suddenly, she took little Mei's phone and dialed Qin Anlin's number with trembling fingers. Chapter 889. Fortunately, the call finally went through. Pei Huan wiped her tears and raised her head. Qin Anlin, I know I don't have any influence in your company, but Pei Chi is in your heart, right? Listen up. Old Can was injured and taken away by Fifth Master O to save me. Fifth Master O said that he was going to kill him. Qin Anlin, listen up. If anything happens to Old Can, Pei Chi won't forgive you. Qin Anlin listened quietly. When he heard the last part, he sneered. What does it have to do with me whether she forgives me or not? He hung up the phone after saying that. Pei Huan was stunned for a moment. Then, she started to call again. However, she couldn't get through. She had been blacklisted. She screamed and cursed. Qin Anlin, you bastard. You deserve to die a horrible death. You gave birth to a son without a pair of eyes. She bent over and coughed violently because of the pain. Xiaomei supported her. Why don't we go back and beg President Qin? Pei Huan's eyes were gray. It felt like when Jinrong was lying in the hospital and the doctor announced that he would become a vegetable. It's too late. Pei Huan pushed Xiaomei away. Don't follow me. I don't want to hurt you. She ran to the door and tore off her high heels. She ran down the stairs under the dim light. She was very fast and almost fell a few times. Even so, when she reached the bottom of the building, Yangming's car had already started and driven away. Pei Huan followed Fifth Master O's car and ran with all her might. Tears and blood blurred her eyes. It was very hot, and there was a strong smell of blood. It was Old Can's blood, the blood that he had shed for her. She ran with all her might as if she didn't know fatigue. In the past, Pei Huan didn't know why she lived, but now, she knew that she had fallen in love with a man. She wanted to be with him. Even if she couldn't bear children for him, she wanted to be with him. In the car in front, Fifth Master O closed his eyes and said calmly, "Is that woman still following you?" The bodyguard in front nodded. "Yes, Fifth Master." Fifth Master O laughed. "It's said that actresses are heartless and whores are heartless. I've really opened my eyes today." His phone just happened to ring. He glanced at it and saw that it was Qin Anlin. This kid, when did he become so sentimental? Picking up the phone, Qin Anlin's voice was quite flat. "Lao Wu, give me some face. I'll treat you to a meal another day." Since Qin Anlin said that, O Yangming would more or less give him face. In fact, he had already changed his mind. This pair of infatuated man and lonely woman was really touching. Forget it. Release him. Old Can was thrown out of the car and into the deep autumn night by his subordinates. Fifth Master O got out of the car and watched as Pei Huan ran over to hug Lao Kansas. He slowly walked in front of her and looked down at her. "If you like him, then marry him. There aren't many good men like him." Owuye's tone was calm, but there was a hint of sadness in it. It was as if his heart had been ruthlessly torn apart. Pei Huan raised her teary eyes. If it was the Pei Huan of the past, she would probably have scolded someone. But the current her was not the same as before. She could be willful, but Old Can still had to work in the future. He loved photography, so it was impossible for him to leave the industry. Pei Huan held back her tears and thanked him softly. Fifth Master O had mixed feelings when he heard her thank him. He took the wallet from his subordinate and threw 20,000 yuan. "Take this as the medical fee." He waved his hand and gestured for his subordinate to send Old Can to the hospital. Chapter 890. On the other side, Qin Anlin slowly put down the phone in his hand and smiled bitterly. In the end, he still couldn't be cruel to Pei Chi-Chi. In the end, there was still hope in his heart. After she had sex with Tang Yu's face darkened. Lao Can was sent to the first hospital of B City. After a detailed examination, he was found to have only superficial wounds, and there was no damage to his bones and internal organs. Xiaomei was busy, and Pei Huan. She was responsible for crying. At first, Lao Can's consciousness was blurred. Later, when he opened his swollen eyes, he saw Pei Huan crying sadly. He closed his eyes again uncomfortably. "Why are you crying?" "I'm not dead yet." Pei Huan's voice sounded like she was crying. "I'm just sad." "More sad than me?" Lao Can couldn't bear to see a woman crying, so he scolded her. As a result, Pei Huan cried even louder. Lao Can cursed in a low voice and closed his eyes. His voice was still rough. "If you cry again, I'll throw you out." Pei Huan stopped crying and looked at Lao Can with tears in her eyes. There was reluctance and grievance in her eyes. Lao Can didn't say anything. He thought to himself, "I can't be soft-hearted. I can't be soft-hearted." What was this? This girl was the same age as Pei Chi-Chi. She was so young that she could be his daughter. "If you throw me out, I'll come back." Pei Nan played her shameless role and wiped her snot. Lao Can's face darkened. "You're so dirty." No matter how much he disliked it, Pei Huan had taken root in this word anyway. Xiaomei took care of everything. She was only responsible for being beautiful and serving Lao Can fruits and peeling them beautifully to please him. As for the rough work, it was done by the nurses. After a day or two, Lao Can probably understood her little plan even though he was a rough man. After thinking it through, he still felt a little depressed. Lao Can felt awkward in his heart. As a man, why was he afraid of a little girl? The phone on the bedside rang. Lao Can looked at it and found it was Suimo. He unconsciously looked at Pei Huan again and then answered the phone. His voice was a little low and hoarse. "Suimo, what's the matter?" He didn't know what the other side said, but Lao Can just smiled and said, "It's just a minor injury. You don't have to come to see me." His expression was a little peculiar. He glanced at Pei Huan again and laughed dryly. "Already here? Oh, come on up. I live in bed 1208. As he spoke, Pei Huan kept watching. She took a bite of the apple and squinted at the adulterous couple talking. In Pei Huan's heart, Lao Can was already her man, but now he was flirting with another woman. Don't tell me that I don't have any relationship with that old woman called Suimo. If I don't, I'll write her name backwards. Pei Huan glared at Lao Can while munching on an apple. It was about time. Pei Huan threw away the apple in her hand and sat on Lao Can's lap. She put her slender and fair arms around Lao Can's neck. "What do you think of our relationship?" "What relationship?" Old Can feigned ignorance. Pei Huan sat in his arms and exhaled like an orchid, like a little fairy. "Ex-relationship?" Old Can laughed dryly. "It's only once. Forget about it. It's not good to remember something that happened so long ago." Pei Huan held him with one hand and touched his neck with the other. She smiled and said, "But I'm looking right here." Chapter 891. Suimo heard the commotion inside, but she did not push the door open. Qin Anlin also happened to meet her. In the ward, Pei Huan asked in a seductive voice, "Also, what's your relationship with the woman on the phone just now?" "Suimo, right? She's quite a famous woman. Did you sleep with her before?" Old Can almost fainted. He wanted to push Pei Huan away. "You're just a kid. Don't mess around." But Pei Huan stuck to him like a piece of sticky candy. He couldn't push her away at all. Oldkin was a little annoyed and was about to get serious. However, Pei Huan's eyes turned red and she became serious. "Can Mingzhu, I don't care how many women you've had in the past. In fact, I'm no better than you. We're a broken couple. Also, I don't know if I can bear children anymore. I had an abortion before. It was for my ex-husband." Pei Huan's voice was a little calm and sad, but it was filled with courage. It was enough to move old Kansas. It took courage for a girl to say these things. Pei Huan hugged him tightly, afraid that he would run away. "Last time, you asked me if I wanted you to take responsibility after you slept with me. Can Mingzhu, I'm telling you now, I want you to take responsibility." Oldkin was dumbfounded. Oldkin was dumbfounded. Oldkin did not expect Pei Huan to do this. When he came back to his senses, his voice was a little hoarse. "Our age gap is too big. I don't care." Pei Huan was very bold. She knew that Suimo was outside, but she still said it. "I think yours is very good. It's big and it's good. I'm quite satisfied." Oldkin swallowed his saliva. He had never heard a woman praise him so bluntly in this aspect. It was undeniable that he was a rough person, and he liked this method. If it wasn't for his injury, he would have loved to have sex with her again. He wanted to hear her say in her beautiful voice, "Old Can, you're really amazing." Thinking of this made him feel a lot more pain. Pei Huan continued, "Unless you care that I might not be able to bear children." "I don't care about that." Old Can's voice was a little uncomfortable and hoarse. If one looked closely, one would even notice that his face was abnormally dark red. Pei Huan cheered and kissed his lips. Then, she pushed him down. Oldkin smiled bitterly. "Why are you so impatient?" Pei Huan occupied him like a madwoman, her hands tugging at his hospital gown. Just like that, she slept with Lao Can, catching him off guard. Yes, she was sleeping for Suimo to see. A woman's intuition had always been accurate. She could guess that Suimo was Lao Can's white moonlight. Now that she had slept with Lao Can, she wanted to see if they could still be white. In Pei Huan's mind, there was nothing that couldn't be solved by sleeping. If once wasn't enough, then twice. He had to admit that Oldkin was passive at first, but after a while, he started to feel it. It wasn't just a physiological feeling, but also a spiritual resonance. He thought that he needed a girl with such courage. Even if he didn't appreciate Pei Huan very much, compared to Pei Chi-Chi, she was really nothing. However, at this moment, he really liked this girl because he could make her so happy. Inside the room, the atmosphere was as warm as tea. Outside, Suamo was shocked. Her ears were filled with Lao Kin's words. He doesn't care if he has children or not. Then why had she hesitated and persisted all these years? Chapter 892. Suamo could not accept such a blow and stood there in a daze. Qin Anlin said calmly, Suamo, sometimes a missed opportunity is a missed opportunity. The person who has been waiting for you won't always wait for you in the same place. Suamo looked at him. I think he must have fallen in love with Pei Huan. If you knew what happened between them the day before yesterday, you wouldn't have intervened between them. Qin Anlin then walked to the elevator, not intending to enter again. He had come today to ask Pei Huan some questions. Actually, there was no need to ask. He had roughly guessed why Fifth Master O was making things difficult for Pei Huan, and who was making things difficult for her. Suamo stood at the door and did not move for a long time. She could hear Oldkin's heavy breathing coming from inside. It was a sound she was familiar with. He originally belonged to her. However, he was ready to give himself to someone else. Was he? Sumo's pride did not allow her to push the door open and enter. Moreover, it was just as Qin Anlin had said, Lao Can had fallen in love with Pei Huan. She really could not understand why Lao Can would like Pei Huan, who was a good-for-nothing and messy girl. Suamo put down the tonic she had brought and left quietly. In the ward, it took half an hour before it ended. Pei Huan collapsed on Lao Can's hun mouth and laughed like a cat. Old Can panted heavily. This little demoness was going to take his old life. Pei Huan reached out and pulled Lao Can's hun hair. Why isn't your woman here yet? Lao Can glared at her and realized that he had fallen into this little girl's trap. In other words, Suamo had been eavesdropping outside when he was making love with this girl just now? Lao Can's breathing became more rapid. His huge nostrils opened and closed like an old cow in labor, and his eyes were staring at Pei Huan. However, Pei Huan was not afraid of him. She looked at him with eyes even wider than his, and her voice was even more displeased. I regret it. I can't bear to part with your baby. At this moment, Pei Huan's voice was raised by an octave, and she looked very much like Zhou Meilin. However, Lao Can appreciated it. He found that he strangely liked Pei Huan's shrewdness, and he liked it when she spoke loudly to him. Oldkin grabbed her hair and said gruffly, What's there to be reluctant about? Do you dare to do it again? Pei Huan licked her lips and looked at Lao Can with a ferocious gaze, like a tigress. Old Can's hand moved downwards. You little slut. The atmosphere in the ward heated up again. Pei Huan had decided on Old Can. Just as Pei Huan fell asleep from exhaustion, Lao Can received a call from Pei Chi-Chi. Old Can, why are you in the hospital? Pei Chi-Chi's voice was a little nervous. She was the chief editor of the telephone company. She felt that it was impossible. Old Can's body was as strong as an ox. How could he get sick? Naked, Old Can leaned against the headboard of the bed and glanced at Pei Chi-Chi beside him. Pei Chi-Chi, Pei Huan and I are together. Pei Chi-Chi was stunned. She held the phone in her hand and did not speak for a long time. Thinking that she did not understand, Old Can explained further, she is in the same bed with me now. Moreover, they had just finished 2 rounds of exercise. On the other end, Pei Chi-Chi finally reacted. She almost roared. Let Pei Huan answer the phone. Her voice was so loud that Old Can frowned. Then, he threw the phone to Pei Huan, who had woken up. Chapter 893. Feeling a little guilty, she held her phone in her hand and did not know what to do. She looked at Old Can and tugged at his hair. Say something. Old Can grinned. Say what? That I actually feel good? Pei Huan pulled her hair and screamed. She did not know why, but she was especially afraid of Pei Chi-Chi now, afraid that she would be disappointed. She had never felt this way when she slept with Lin Jinro. After 2 rounds of sleep, old Can was full of energy. He lifted the quilt and got out of bed to wash his face so that the 2 sisters could have a heart-to-heart talk. Pei Huan finally picked up the phone and looked in the direction of the bathroom resentfully as she listened. Old Can, this jerk. He slept comfortably and let her get scolded. Pei Huan's head shrank after being scolded by Pei Chi-Chi. Finally, she meowed like a kitten. Chi-Chi, I think Shenlian is targeting me on purpose. You have to be careful too. That woman is a mad dog now. There was silence on the other end of the phone. Pei Chi-Chi's heart strangely softened. However, it was only for a short while. After a while, he roared again. You're not going anywhere. When I come back, I'll skin you alive. Do you hear me? Pei Huan howled and said to Old Can, who was shaving in the bathroom, Your disciple wants to skin me alive. Aren't you going to do something about it? Old Can replied casually as he was shaving, We are the disciples who are in charge of the master. As he spoke, Old Can seemed to have thought of something and coughed lightly. Did you want to be a sister in the past? Old Can's reproachful expression made Pei Huan shrink a little more. She hung up the phone and got out of bed. Her legs were so sore that she could not walk and had to hold her hands. The reason was that Old Can's size was really shocking. Pei Huan was shocked the moment she walked into the bathroom. Old Can's face, which was full of beard, was now smooth and clean. He looked like a different person, especially since he looked so much younger. Pei Huan swallowed her saliva and complained, You scared me to death. Why didn't you want to be a man? Why did you have to be a gigolo? Old Can looked into the mirror. He had expected to be praised, appreciated, and even praised. But now, not only was there no praise, there was even disdain. He looked carefully, then looked at Pei Huan. People used to say that I was handsome, right? How did he become a gigolo when it came to you? Pei Huan ignored him and went to the toilet to wash her face and hands, looking angry. Old Can scratched his head. If you don't like it, I won't shave it anymore. Pei Huan finally exploded and poked him in the heart. How long do you have to keep this big beard for it to have this effect? Did you ask for my permission before shaving? Do you know how much I love this mustache? How much I love those sexy lips underneath that fluffy mustache? When he got angry, he grabbed Lao Can Xiong's fur with both hands and forcefully pulled it off. Lao Can screamed in pain. He held the disobedient girl in his arms and pressed her against the wall. His breathing was hot, and his eyes looked like they were about to spit fire. However, no matter how fierce he was, he could not do anything to her. Who told her to be so much younger than him? Pei Huan raised her head and looked at the man in front of her. Chapter 894. Old Can's eyes were locked on her little face, and his voice was surprisingly gentle. Won't you be pricked when we do it? Pei Huan had always been thick-skinned, but when Old Can said that, she blushed and reached out to push him away. Who wants to do it with you? But how could she push Old Can, who was like a mountain? Old Can pressed one hand on her shoulder. Without his beard, he looked much more civilized. His expression suddenly became much more serious as he looked at Pei Huan. Little girl, have you really decided to be with me? Pei Huan did not answer his question directly, but asked him pitifully, Old Can, will you dislike me? Old Can's large palm stroked her little face, and his voice was a little hoarse. Silly girl, what are you talking about? What if I can't have children? Pei Huan still looked uneasy. The more one cared, the more one would worry about gains and losses. Old Can pinched her cheeks, which were full of collagen, and revealed his white teeth. Then be my daughter. I'll dote on you like one. Pei Huan called him daddy like a little wolf puppy, which made Old Can pat her hard to show his love. He smiled and said, Don't act in such messy shows in the future. You're not allowed to eat when you're filming. If you have to eat, bring me along and let people know that you have a master. Got it? He started to educate her, because he was really a little worried about her, because she was just as bad as he was. However, it was exactly the two of them who suddenly realized that they were each other's warmth one day. At that moment, the fiercer he was towards Pei Huan, the more Pei Huan felt a sense of belonging. Not only was she not angry, but she also howled when Oldkin said something. What a good-for-nothing. She looked at Oldkin like a little wolf puppy looking at its master, her eyes full of adoration. At that moment, Oldkin thought of Suimo. Suimo had never looked at him like that. Suimo was independent, so independent that he sometimes felt that she did not need him. If a man like Oldkin was steel, then he needed a woman who was like water, and Pei Huan came at the right time. He sighed in his heart, thinking that it was her. Whether it was good or bad, he still liked her. Be obedient in the future and don't talk back. Also, I will buy a house in B City. In the future, I will pay for the living expenses. You can keep the money as pocket money. Pei Huan, who had more money, was still as happy as a wolf puppy. At this time, she would be happy no matter what Oldkin said, but she had to make it clear. I don't care what happened in the past. We have to be clean from now on. I have no problem with that. If you dare to mess around with Suimo again, and if you dare to hang out with those rich women again, Can Mingzhu, I'll fuck you. Pei Huan was full of vigor. She even dared to grab Oldkin's ear. Oldkin said gruffly, "Got it." Only then did Pei Huan let him off. She spread out her hands. "Give me the money. I'm going out to buy something." Laukin took a deep look at her and felt that she was very smart. He walked out, took out his wallet from his pocket, and threw her 1,000 yuan in cash and a bank card. "Take this, there's about a few 100,000 yuan in it. Also, I will buy a house as soon as possible." Pei Huan's face blushed. She looked at Old Can and suddenly kissed his lips. "Can Mingzhu, I will love you well from now on. I will be good." Chapter 895. On the other side, Pei Chi hung up the phone, feeling a little stunned. Lao Can and Pei Huan were together, and it wasn't Pei Huan's wishful thinking, because Lao Can didn't deny it. Something must have happened in between, and Pei Chi could feel it. She pursed her lips, feeling a little stunned. Her body was held in the arms of a warm man, and she struggled. "Tang Yu, what are you thinking about?" Tang Yu put his face on her shoulder. "Why are you so lost in thought?" Pei Chi couldn't get away from him, so she gave up and said softly, "I want to go back to City B." Tang Yu smiled. "The private flight tomorrow morning." Pei Chi suddenly turned her head and looked at him. Lao Can is in the hospital. However, she knew in her heart that it shouldn't be serious, otherwise he and Pei Huan wouldn't be together. But she really wanted to know what had happened. Tang Yu looked into her eyes, and after a long time, he said lightly, "You seem to care about him very much." "He's my mentor." Pei Chi pursed her lips. Tang Yu took her little hand and put it on his heart. "I'm your husband." "Pei Chi, I'll be jealous if you do this." "Ex-husband, Mr. Tang." Pei Chi corrected him. "Also, don't touch me. You have a fiancé." He chuckled and lowered his head to bite her little neck, deliberately hurting her. When she cried out in pain, he easily picked her up with both hands and put her on the large balcony. The night was like a curtain. In the darkness of the night, a man and a woman doing anything together was exceptionally seductive. He was only wearing a shirt, so when she put her fingertips on his shoulder, she felt a burning sensation. When she stumbled to the balcony, her pajamas were pulled up to her waist. His thin shoulders were so white that they almost glowed in the dark night. He lowered his head and bit it, his voice a little confused. "Chi, don't say such things in the future." "Which one?" She put her small hands on his shoulders and lowered her head to look at his black head. She was also panting. Tang Yu's lips trailed along her delicate neck and slowly moved upwards, kissing her little mouth. His voice was very soft, but there was a certain power in it. "Pei Chi, I've never belonged to anyone else." She parted her lips and looked at him. He suddenly seized her little hand and forced her to unbutton his shirt. Pei Chi refused. She retracted her hands and said no. "But I want it." He took her firmly, finally landing on his belt. He pressed his forehead against hers and said softly, "Chi, We might not be able to be together like this every day when we return to Bee City. He said those words against her lips, stirring up waves of passion. Pei-Chi was a little angry. I don't want to be with you. You do. He leaned forward. Chi-Chi, you can't lie to me. His palms caressed her, and his voice was even more seductive. You desire me. She pushed him away and bit her lip. Tang you. I haven't thought about it yet. Then think about it after doing it, he said shamelessly. With that, he carried her and kissed her lips. Or do you prefer to do it on the bed? She hit him. You're shameless. If the sofa or the bathroom can make you happier, I'll cooperate. He was very magnanimous. No matter how she argued with him, he would always find a way to shut her little mouth. In the midst of her drowsiness, Pei-Chi seemed to hear Tang Yu whispering in her ear. Chapter 896. In her drowsy state, Pei-Chi seemed to hear Tang Yu whispering beside her ear. Chi-Chi, I'm yours. Come back to me. She closed her eyes, feeling guilty. She had a long dream. She dreamed of Tang Xian, and she dreamt that Tang Xian called her Chi-Chi. Later, she dreamed of a little girl jumping around with her back facing her. She wanted to hug her, but the little girl turned around. It was Tang Xian's face. She could still hear Tang Yu's low and hoarse voice calling her name. Her eyelashes fluttered. She slowly opened her eyes and saw his handsome face. She panted slightly and touched her forehead. Her forehead was covered in sweat. She heard a faint sound. She looked around and realized that they were already on the private jet. Pei-Chi suddenly realized that she had not done much since coming to America. She had only accompanied Tang Yu in bed for 3 days. He was indeed on a business trip, but the rest of the time was spent on making love to her. Tang Yu leaned over. He was wearing a 3-piece suit. He looked at her deeply and suddenly laughed. Pei-Chi, you even know about the existence of the child and signed your name. She glared at him. He laughed and patted her. Go wash up in the bathroom. We'll reach the airport in Bee City in an hour. Pei-Chi was stunned for a moment. She looked at her watch and found it hard to believe. Tang Yu smiled. Chi-Chi, you've slept for 20 hours. Of course, he had slept with her for the first 10 hours. Pei-Chi kept rewinding her memories. Her face turned red. She cursed at him and lifted the blanket to go to the washroom. She reached out and pulled open her collar. Her neck was covered in strawberries. What a pervert. She splashed water on her face. She did not want to admit that she had been seduced by him. He was not the only one who had wanted it for the past 3 days. She had longed for him too. When she went out, her face was still red. She pursed her lips and didn't say anything. Tang Yu didn't say anything either. He just arranged dinner. Not long after they finished eating, the private jet landed at Bee City's airport, whistling through the sky. It slowly glided to a stop. Tang Yu carried her small suitcase down first and let her help him land. There were a few cars parked in front of them. In the dark night, the logo of the Golden Goddess shone brightly. Tang Yu paused and turned to look at Pei-Chi condescendingly. His voice was as gentle as the night. I'll get old Zhao to send you to the hospital later, okay? Pei-Chi lowered her little face and did not utter a word. After a while, she asked softly, Tang Yu, our child. She lifted her head and looked at him very seriously. Are you really still there? His heart was extremely soft. His little fellow was so insecure. He reached out and gently caressed her little face, his fingertips rubbing her red lips. Of course it's true. Little fool. She pursed her lips, still lifting her head and looking at him helplessly. For the time being, there might not be many ways to meet like in America. He finally reached out and pulled her into his arms. Her little face was pressed against his chest, feeling extremely warm. Chi-Chi, I'll wait for you here. His large palm stroked her long hair, his voice gentle and husky. At this moment, he hoped that his Chi-Chi would be treated with gentleness by the whole world. Pei-Chi-Chi's voice was a little gloomy. Tang Yu, I never said that I would be with you. Chapter 897. She didn't make a sound. They hadn't been together for a long time. Even though they had slept together, she still felt uncomfortable. Seeing the hesitation on her face, Tang Yu paused. Pei Chi, I don't know when you became so open-minded. I'm not as open-minded as Mr. Tang. Mr. Tang would spend 100 million on a woman. She glanced at him and pushed him away. Should I do the same? After all, I might become the richest man in the future. Tang Yu was both annoyed and amused. She was bringing up the past again. However, he actually liked it when she threw a tantrum. He pinched her face. I might need you to take care of me in the future. Please take care of me for the rest of my life, Miss Pei. Pei Chi glared at him. Tang Yu, you really know how to be shameless. He didn't get angry. He smiled warmly and pulled her into his arms. He lowered his head and kissed her. All right, Chi, be careful. She lifted her eyes and looked up at him. Although she was stubborn and always said that she didn't want to be with him, they were going to be separated now. From tomorrow onwards, they would be strangers in front of others again. He was even Shan Lian's fiancé. Pei Chi felt a little sad. Be good and listen to me. He kissed her forehead again. Our Chi is the bravest. No way. She bit her lip and looked up at his handsome face. I don't want to be brave. I only want to be with you. She didn't say it out loud, but Tang Yu knew it. He sent her to the car, his hand on the door. He smiled. Pei Chi, remember, the child and I are the reward for clearing the game. For some reason, Pei Chi bit her lip. I've already slept with you. It doesn't matter if I don't sleep with you or not. He was still smiling. These 3 days are a benefit. Pei Chi, don't you want to develop more rewards? There was a trace of moisture in her eyes. Tang Yu leaned over and kissed her. Be good, listen to me. With that, he was about to close the door. Suddenly, a pair of small hands wrapped around his waist, and a small face was buried in his chest. Tang Yu was stunned for a moment, then he smiled and hugged her. Chi, you're not a child anymore. But his voice was gentle, and his tone was clearly meant for a child. Pei Chi did not say anything. She just hugged him tightly. She closed her eyes. At this moment, when they were about to separate, there was a feeling of reality. Only then did she feel that they were really together again. Her little face was pressed against his waist, and her fluffy hair rubbed against him, making him feel a little itchy. Tang Yu's voice was unbelievably gentle. All right, baby. He stroked her hair, and his eyes were a little warm. He knew it meant forgiveness. Chi, I'm sorry. She didn't ask, but he still said it. Because of the choice he made, Tang Xian lost her life. To Chi, that was a hurdle that was difficult to overcome. She was still in his arms, and her voice was muffled. Tang Yu, we'll have many babies in the future. Every one of them will be named Tang Xian, okay? There would always be one, the original one. She was being silly. In his heart, he called her a little fool, but he agreed to it. Okay, we'll have many more. Then why did you still get a vasectomy? Her little hand tugged on his belt, and her voice became even more muffled. Tang Yu laughed and patted her little hand. It didn't affect your function, did it? He paused for a moment. Pei Chi, if it affects your function, then I'll go for surgery. Chapter 898. No. She was afraid that he would go for another operation, so she quickly said. However, Tang Yu deliberately twisted her words. You mean, you don't like to use the tea? No. Pei Chi bit her lip. He was so shameless. She took back what she said before, and he kept smiling gently. He closed the door, and Lao Zhao drove the car away slowly. Tang Yu stood there in the dark, quietly watching. At this moment, Xiao Ran came from behind. She had a complicated expression on her face. The rose garden called. She was a little hesitant. Shunlian is there. Under the night sky, Tang Yu's face was cold. He walked to a black limousine, opened the door, and got in. He closed his eyes slightly. Back to Rose Garden. After getting in the car again, Tang Yu didn't speak again. Xiao Ran sat in the front passenger seat and didn't dare to speak. Although Tang Yu didn't say anything, Xiao Ran still chose to go with him. It wouldn't be a good scene later. She was a woman, and sometimes she could be useful. And Tang Yu's face was as dark as water. The black limousine drove very fast, cutting through the thick darkness of the night. It also seemed to tear a hole in his heart. Tang Yu took out his phone and dialed the number of Rose Garden. His voice was indifferent. Don't let Shun Lian go upstairs. The little maid's voice was trembling. Miss Shun has already gone upstairs. She is making a scene now. Got it. Tang Yu put down the phone, and his face was even more serious. Drive faster. The driver smiled bitterly. It was already very fast, but he still gritted his teeth and stepped on the accelerator. After an hour, the car stopped in front of the main residence of Rose Garden. When it stopped, Tang Yu got out of the car, and Xiao Ran quickly followed. When they walked to the hall, there was the sound of something breaking upstairs. The little maid was trembling. Miss Shun is upstairs. We don't dare to go. Just as Tang Yu was about to go upstairs, Shun Lian's figure appeared on the stairs. She was dressed in black, but her lips were bright red. She looked like the goddess of vengeance in the dark night. She lifted her chin slightly and looked at Tang Yu with a cold expression. You're finally willing to come back? Tang Yu's eyes were colder than hers. Who let you come here? Shun Lian's bright red lips parted into a flamboyant smile. Tang Yu, can I come? Her voice was unbelievably soft. I'm your fiancé. Why can't I come? I know, this is the sweet memory of you and Pei Chi-Chi after your marriage. How can an evil supporting female character like me come here? She was extremely delighted and sneered. But so what? So what if Pei Chi-Chi is back? I am still your fiancé. No one said you weren't. Tang Yu's voice was indifferent. It was as if Shun Lian's punches were landing on cotton. Tears suddenly flowed down her cheeks. This was probably how it felt to be completely ignored by others. No matter what you do, he won't be happy, nor will he be unhappy. Shun Lian was crying, but there was still pride on her face. Then, as your fiancé, I have the right to do anything to your precious Xiao Qi. Tang Yu's dark eyes locked onto her, and there was a storm in his calm eyes. Are you afraid? Shun Lian's face was twisted. I think, now that Pei Chi-Chi is back, this fake is no longer needed, so... Chapter 899. She won't speak. Shun Lian smiled with tears in her eyes. Her tears were filled with hatred towards him. She's fake, just like my foot. She raised her leg and her dress slid down to her ankles, revealing the instep of her high heels. She laughed maniacally. This foot, no matter how realistic it is, no matter how good the shoes are, no matter how steady I walk while enduring the pain, it's not real. Her eyes were wide open as she looked at Tang Yu. Even I feel disgusted looking at it. And all of this is thanks to you. Shun Lian's voice was a little hysterical. Her entire body was trembling violently, and she was in a frenzy. So, I broke your baby. Tang Yu looked at her tearful face and her crazy look. His dark eyes stared at her, and he spat out a few words. Throw Miss Shen out. Xiao Ran was a little embarrassed behind him. After all, she was his fiancée in name. It wouldn't be nice to throw her out. Seeing that no one moved, Tang Yu said in a deep voice, Throw her out. Shun Lian was stunned. Her pupils contracted violently. She couldn't believe what she had heard. Tang Yu, you can't do this to me. She screamed frantically. She was held by two men and dragged out of the building. The little maid was a little frightened. Her voice was trembling. Sir, we didn't know Miss Shun would do this. Tang Yu didn't say anything and went upstairs slowly. Xiao Ran thought about it and followed him. When they reached the second floor, they were stunned. Everything that could be smashed had been smashed, including Tang Yu and Pei Chi-Chi's wedding photos. There were also some women's clothes that were torn beyond recognition. It was obvious that they belonged to Pei Chi-Chi. Tang Yu stepped on the broken pieces of the room. His voice was very soft. Xiaoqi. In the quiet, shattered space, there was a sound like gears turning, followed by a weak voice, "Dad, Dad." Tang Yu's heart tightened. He pushed aside a few pieces of torn clothes and found 7 underneath. Xiaoqi was no longer the Xiaoqi from before. One of her feet was missing. Tang Yu's heart tightened, and a murderous intent rose in his eyes. 7 laid there and reached out. "Daddy, hug me." Tang Yu closed his eyes in pain and reached out to hug Xiaoqi. Chi-Chi had returned, but Xiaoqi was his only source of comfort during his darkest times. To him, Xiaoqi was not a substitute, but another person with eyes. He hugged 7 and watched as she blinked in his arms. Machines didn't feel pain, but at this moment, Xiaoqi's expression still broke his heart. Tang Yu turned off the switch on Xiaoqi and caressed the place where her foot was missing. He carried Xiaoqi with one hand and called the manager of Marvel's R&D department. Manager Lin. Manager Lin rushed over that very night and personally carried Tang Yu's precious baby away. He also promised that he would definitely repair it until it was as good as before. After Manager Lin left, Tang Yu stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window and smoked quietly. Xiao Ran didn't leave. She carefully instructed the servants to clean up the floor, but she still couldn't make up her mind. She braced herself and asked, "President, these clothes on the floor? Throw them away. There was no point in keeping them after they were torn." Chapter 900. Xiao Ran nodded, cleaned up the place, and instructed people to rearrange the bed sheets. She knew that Tang Yu slept on this bed every day. Although it was not as clean as before, he would not easily change his place to sleep, so she could only rearrange it tomorrow. Xiao Ran left, and Tang Yu turned around. His cold face was a little more hostile than before. Xun Lian had touched his bottom line. He reached out and dialed a number. It was a hacker code name, King. "Find that man." When he said that, there was a hint of cruelty on his face. "Let Xun Lian have more things to do. Also, take some recent photos of her. Make it more exciting." King agreed. Tang Yu hung up the phone, and his face darkened. Outside, Xun Lian was thrown out and fell to the ground, next to her red sports car. She sat on the ground, looking up at the main house in the night, like a giant that wanted to swallow the night. It was also something that she could not reach. Xun Lian laughed, and her cold tears were pitiless in the dark night. Did Tang Yu not like her that much? He gave all the best to Pei Chi-Chi and even ignored her feelings, giving Pei Chi-Chi interviews again and again. The one under Jiaoren magazine, once one was born, it would have a great impact on Jean Tai's man. Man's main focus was the fashion god, the upstart of the entertainment industry. The one was a handsome and noble business elite, and would reveal the private lives of these elites. After weighing the pros and cons, it was obvious which side had the upper hand. Xun Lian knew that these elites had a very high traffic value. Their fans would be the ladies and daughters of the upper class, and their spending power could not be compared to ordinary fans. He was purposely going against her, which was why he was praising Pei Chi-Chi. Xun Lian did not regret what happened today at all. This was what he deserved. The pain in his heart was not even 1 in 10,000 compared to hers. Her eyes were full of pain, full of unwillingness. Pei Chi-Chi arrived at B City's first hospital late at night. She was travel-worn and had been tortured by Tang Yu for 3 whole days. Her legs were sore and her back was aching. She was also worried about Lao Can, so she went to the hospital without stopping. After asking the nurse about the ward, he walked over and pushed the door open. As soon as she pushed the door open, she saw Pei Huan and a handsome man kissing on the bed. Pei Chi-Chi looked at the doorplate. There was no mistake. It was Lao Can's single ward. But where did this man come from? There was fire in Pei Chi-Chi's eyes. She went over and pulled Pei Huan's ear as if she had caught him in the act. Where is Lao Can? Didn't you say that you slept with Old Can? Now, she was trying to have an affair in Old Can's ward. Pei Chi-Chi felt that Pei Huan was too outrageous. She wanted to beat her up until her teeth fell all over the floor. Zhang Xin picked up Pei Huan and fell into a daze. Oh my God, this is a ward, and Pei Huan is wearing too little. Those thin black straps, is it a binding play? Pei Chi-Chi was a woman. She felt like vomiting blood when she saw it. Can Mingzhu, hurry up and save me? Pei Huan's voice sounded a little sorrowful. Pei Chi-Chi was stunned. Then, she stared at the handsome man in his 30s. Her eyes widened. Lao Can touched his smooth chin. I can still look good, right? Pei Chi-Chi was stunned for a long time. Then, she squeezed out a sentence. Looks like he's fine. He has good stamina. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.